Hi, Yat. It's lovely to have you on our show today on Keeping Up with Crypto for Block Insider. And I'm really excited to ask, of course, a ton of questions and look at how far we've come this year. I think one of my first questions to you would be, how has it been going in this space? How has identity changed? How has the crypto space in itself evolved?
I think a lot of people might not remember what Web3 was like 5, 6, 7 years ago, where the space could barely handle millions of dollars of transactions. It was a small group of people. In fact, a lot of people had doubts about whether blockchain could actually work. Right? A lot of people said, "Who needs blockchain? It's not important." Right? And today, it's a product that is used by major institutions. Mostly financial institutions. They're integrating it. They're using it. From the BlackRocks to the Fidelities to the Franklin Templetons and Standard Chartered, and various banks around the world, they're all adopting this technology, and it's become much more mainstream. And I think part of that has to do also with the fact that it's become a really powerful way in which you can also provide more financial access. Right. So we've been sort of, powering this technology. We're now much more active also in the next wave of these things. We're known for NFTs in games, and that is still very important. But now the next wave is RWAs, right, where you can take real life assets. Many people are focusing on stocks and on commodities. However, I think the other thing that becomes interesting is, things like Pokemon cards, right, for instance, or like art items, or like musical instruments that are rare and valuable. It opens up entirely new type of sort of assets that normally people wouldn't be able to participate in. And of course, we're very active with personal agents, particularly with our Hello Minds product. But really, the whole thesis there is that AI agents are going to be the natural users of blockchain. They're going to be very, very comfortable using crypto assets. And in the future, where we're going to have billions of agents, it's going to be their primary banking system, as it were, right? So that's why we're so focused in that, and we think that's going to be the path of mass adoption for crypto through AI agents.
Absolutely. You mentioned somewhere this year that 2026 is going to be the year of utility. And rightly so, you've been talking about RWA, AI agents in picture. We're already down half a year, and with half a year still ahead of us, what are your expectations, and how do you think the first half of this year has panned out with talking in terms of these technologies?
Well, first, when it comes to technology adoption and usage, and generally, let's call it the sort of TradFi and mainstream adoption, it's at record growth. I mean, whether it's Robinhood or Revolut or major banks, right? I mean, like everyone's in it, right? And you've got like Stripe, with Tempo, and so and many of the things that people were doing several years ago in blockchain and crypto is actually what many of these large scale institutions are now doing today, right? And they're learning from the past, and they're partnering in some cases and sort of growing that space, right? And you see this. In fact, today we just saw the announcement, right, where Citadel invested into Crypto.com, right? So another example where more institutional adoption and utility is coming into this. So I would say that the whole sort of thing that we said about that 26 was going to be the year of utility, I think very much has proven out, right? I think what a lot of people sort of are disappointed about is that prices haven't sort of followed with that. And I would say there's a difference between utility and pricing, in a sense that when utility reaches a large enough size and scale, then the value will naturally accrue into it, right? That's normally the case. But when you also have a speculative period, you have people essentially, and this is always the case, right? Or people often sort of, I think the famous expression is, people often overestimate the future and underestimate essentially sort of, sort of at the same time, and they underestimate sort of the near-term effects of that future, right? So it seems ironic for people in the industry to say, why is Bitcoin lower than last year, for instance, and why is Ethereum lower, and what's happening with Solana, and shouldn't they all be rising, when in fact the utility and usage, particularly when it comes to TVL and transactions, is larger than ever, right? And I think again, this is the point where the speculative side versus the utility side haven't yet caught up. Meaning that if the utility was, just like it was last year, we would have the same impact, right? But it's growing, and so if we believe, which we do, that the utility will continue to grow and grow and grow and grow, then prices and the value of these assets would naturally follow. Not that much different from when you think about companies that have profits in the stock market. When they start doing well, then finally the price starts to appreciate, right? Even when you think of it as a startup, people forget that companies like Facebook or Microsoft or Google, they all were once small companies. Like, in fact, even Nvidia, most valuable or second most valuable company in the world, depending which day you look at, was a tiny company in comparison to today, right? So utility does take time, but when it happens, it's going to explode, right? So I think we need to distinguish between the two. And if you're long-term bullish, then you hold, and if you're not, then of course you're free to sell. And I think that's the beautiful thing about crypto. Like, over during when there's all these problems, in Iran and US and all that kind of stuff, people are able to trade essentially tokenized oil and tokenized commodities, while the stock market is essentially shut off and sleeping because they don't work over the weekend, right? So again, you can see, it's more a reflection of a true market, and that's developing faster and faster. And we're seeing a lot more activity from TradFi in crypto. And of course, it does alter the shift in terms of tokens, because while tokens are going to keep growing and there's going to be more utility for them, the relevance of the token is now competing with the entire asset class. So that means that, for instance, if gold has value, or if, I don't know, Samsung has value, right, or Nvidia has value, and it happens to be tokenized, that becomes additional competitive playing ground to your tokens, which wasn't the case before, right? So you have a situation where suddenly attention is going there, but in our book, that's a positive, because it also brings more people from the other side into it, and explores and exposes that. But you now have to tell and talk about why it's valuable, which you can do, right? It was only a few years ago where you weren't even allowed to talk about utility. Otherwise, you would get basically, slapped by certain federal agencies and be in trouble, right? So again, we're sort of in this sort of in between phase, shall we say? I wouldn't say it's reflective of true nature, reflective of the market, but this lag stuff always happens.
Absolutely, very well put. And you're absolutely right that that tug of war between utility and speculation is going to continue. And yet, we have sprinted quite far in terms of where we are as an industry, where we were, say, 4 or 5 years ago. In fact, I remember the
Absolutely.
first interview that I took with you versus now. Things have changed. A lot of things are in better shape at, I'd say, today's date.
Fundamentally, absolutely better shape. I think it's just that, there's a lot of sentiment and feelings and politics, and the world is of course unstable, right? So there's a bunch of things that sort of add to it. But fundamentally, we have the world's largest economy being bullish and supportive on crypto, right? That's about as positive as it gets. We have other countries around the world all trying to sort of figure out what to do in the space. Stablecoin policies broadly being adopted more and more in other places. Crypto adoption, exchanges, getting licensed. So you can see a lot of progress that's happening already.
Absolutely. Plus, the kind of accessibility that tokenization of stocks, especially in the US market, has brought. Love to see that now, probably an Asian, Southeast Asian, sitting in a country like maybe India or Japan, getting
Absolutely.
US stocks. So
I mean,
that's
I give
interesting.
you, and it's not just your stocks. It's like yield. For instance, with Nuva, which is our joint venture with Provenance, you now have the ability to basically buy a high value yield on basically sort of with HELOCs and sort of mortgages, and more importantly, you can the yield is hourly. Okay, and that's something you can do on chain. So if you want to put your money into the vault at Nuva and you want to withdraw it, you can basically get your yield on an hourly basis. Now, we know that blockchain can do this, but we know that sort of you put it in a bank, you might have to lock it up for at least a week, maybe a month, right? And this is not necessarily necessary in crypto. And once people start realizing, well, hold on, this is just a better way in which I can manage my cash, then obviously that's how they'll do it. Them or their agents, they'll do it on their behalf, right? Because if you're not spending the money right now, but you want it to be liquid, then
Right.
that's a perfect kind of product, and you can extend that beyond and to everything.
For sure, absolutely. Yeah, one thing that we've always spoken about whenever I have you across me on this table is the metaverse. I know that you're particularly passionate about the gaming space and the
Of course.
metaverse. What's your read on the current state of this sector, and how do you see it going from here? I remember you've also said that the metaverse is largely misunderstood in a recent interview of yours.
Yes.
If you could share a little bit on that.
Yeah, so I think, when people talk about the metaverse, they often have the image of the virtual goggles and that you're basically entering a virtual world. And, we have to remember the framing as to why the construct of the metaverse became so big. Not only because Facebook renamed itself to Meta. That's obviously one of them. And by the way, as much as they're sort of having cuts and so on, they still have the metaverse team. They're still focusing on it, right? So there's obviously shows that they are certainly sort of seeing something. And I think the point is that we have to remember that this was born at a time when COVID was raging. And so, we all thought that we're going to be spending more time online. We are spending a lot more time online. However, we don't exist purely online, should we say, right? Because people thought you're not going to travel, you're always going to be at home. Offices are dead. People, like the flights are airplanes are not going to be going on much anymore. All of that turned out not to be true, right? But it was came from the misconception that that humans want to spend more time in a kind of hyper real virtual environment, almost like replacing the physical world with the virtual world, right? Which is, I think, a great misunderstanding. The metaverse or the virtual world is an enhancement of a physical life. It is not meant to be a replacement for it. Because if it was truly such an excellent replacement, then we would prefer to do that than to travel or to meet people in person, right? And it turns out that we are biological creatures and we are social, and we do like to hang out with people and go to a restaurant and sort of do things together and play sports, right? We don't we don't necessarily want to go somewhere sort of remote all the time. And what is now, and where we're so bullish about the metaverse, is that it's because of AI agents. So
Yeah.
AI agents today are affecting our real life, right? They're handling our calendar. My agents are handling my flights, and they're booking stuff, and they're handling restaurant bookings, and now they're coding stuff for me, and they're planning stuff for me. And basically, they're virtual beings. If you think of it, they are metaversal beings, but they are impacting our physical life in better ways than before, right? So the way that we like to express it to people is that, the mistake is that we thought that we would spend more time in the metaverse, when it turns out that the metaverse is coming to us.
Yeah. Interesting. Absolutely. So you're obviously betting big on AI agents, and rightly so. I suppose that almost everyone is at the point. But for someone, say, hearing this for the first time, what is it that they can imagine? How far can AI agents go? At the moment, they're
Okay,
of course big, but I'd say there's still
that's small,
some.
small. It's still small.
Yeah.
Still small. So let's. I think the whole AI agent stuff really sort of became big with OpenClaw, right? And obviously, OpenClaw and Hermes are very much the market leader at this moment in time. However, when you look at the Open Router rankings, our Hello Minds product is actually, I think, number 4, number 5. So it's moving very, very fast, right? But what's the framing here? Let's talk about where it's going to go. So, for you and your audience, if you were to sort of estimate and think, how many personal AI agents, forget even work, just personal AI agents, do you think you're going to have in the next 3 to 5 years, right? And what would you say?
Yeah, I'd say within 10 for sure. Maybe
Yes,
not.
within 10 for sure. Yeah, right. And the common answer tends to be 3 to 5. If I'm in San Francisco, it's 300, right? So it kind of depends where you are, right? If you're more technical, you kind of want more agents, you see the value. Anyway, the point is that it's going to be more agents than humans. That's for sure,
Mm,
right? And if you take your number and you say, well, it's going to be 10, and we say that's the average for every person that's online, then we're at 70 to 80 billion agents already. Right? And so those agents are going to be the ones roaming the internet, and they're going to be the ones giving you information, and they're going to be doing transactions for you, and they're going to do all that stuff, and the transaction system is going to be on chain, right? So you're going to be basically delegating much of that sort of either stuff that you typically don't consider important to an agent, and then later on they do more and more important stuff, right? And so the world is swarmed with these agents that are essentially handling your information on your behalf, creating value for you, right? And that's basically how the internet is going to be completely reshaped. So that means that if I'm building a product or a service, and if I'm not agent readable, I become irrelevant. If the agent can't find you, then you can't be making business or commerce possibilities. So that means if I have an agent and you don't have an agent, maybe there's no way for them to connect with each other. And while that might sound, while that that concept might sound wild, just imagine, when you are searching today on either Google or when you're using ChatGPT, right? You get a summary, right, from Gemini in the case of Google. When was the last time you clicked through to the website that Gemini suggested you click through, right? And just
hardly.
think about that. Hardly ever, right? But 2 years ago, you clicked through every website. So
Mm,
so so this is a very subtle thing that you might not even notice, But just that subtle thing has reduced for many websites their traffic by up to 80%,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right. And
It's
so the consequence of that, of course, is devastating if you're not ready, but great opportunity if you are, because it also means that if you're AI readable and if the agent knows and finds you, then you get discovered. But then how do you make business? Well, you're not going to have ads anymore because people don't go to your website, which means you have to rely on microtransactions on the back, or you have to rely on services so that you could get a fee. And the microtransactions will be a fraction and a fraction of a cent, but you can do this on chain transparently, which you can't do basically, with traditional payment systems. And also, you don't have agency over it. With on chain, you do have agency over it, right? So there's all these advantages that now come to bear because of that. But that's an example of how everything shifts and changes, right? And so we're going to be seeing every fabric of the internet is going to become agentified, and that's kind of what we call Web 4, with basically a web which is autonomous with AI agents that essentially sort of do stuff, and support us, and frankly, are our agents on our behalf.
interesting. Tell me a little bit more about Minds and
Mm.
their current roadmap, because I suppose you recently demonstrated agent-driven commerce with Visa.
hmm
How far would a person go when it comes to trusting an AI agent with their money, and how is Mind sort of working around it?
Well, so first, if you consider just a little bit sort of internet background, certainly when I was a little younger, some 30 years ago, I remember when people wouldn't even trust giving their credit card to eBay or Amazon.
Yeah.
Right. And why did they not do that? Because, I can't trust them. It's got this, it's like it's a website. I don't know what that is. It's not safe. Blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff, right? And look today, right? I mean, it's almost like, why do you not take my credit card, or why can I not pay online? Why do I have to take something physical? I mean, depending where you are, especially in places like China, it's almost like, why do you even use cash, right?
Yeah.
So all of that has changed dramatically, right? And really over a span of really just a couple of decades, and this is going to accelerate. So the leap, as much as we might have discomfort of, oh, I'm now giving my, sort of financial information or financial data to an autonomous agent. The point, though, is that we were not willing to trust that on a website, and now there's an intelligent agent who can manage it better for you. Why would you not trust that? It would happen very, very quickly, we think, right? As long as they feel safe in the sense that things can happen. So how do you bring that safety? It's not the technology barrier per se. It's basically setting rails. Just like in the early days, when people, one of the reasons why credit card companies started to come out with low credit cards, right, was because it was precisely to be used for things like the internet, or the debit card phenomena as well, where I have a debit card where you can control that, someone can spend $500 or $1,000 or whatever, and so they don't have access to everything. As an example where people are playing around this, agents are exactly the same, except on chain it's even easier. I can say, hey, you can only spend $10 or $50. You can only take the money that's in your wallet. You don't have access to the other money, right? And so you set these rules, and what will happen is that probably most people will set very restrictive rules where they can only maybe spend $50, and then will be a handful of them who will allow them to spend, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they will be able to do amazing things with them. And eventually, that sort of starts to grow, right? We're at that stage, but I would say it's, not a case where, it's a will it happen. It's just, when will it happen, right? And again, you look at the past. I think there's a very clear pattern as to where we're going to be going with sort of agentic commerce, and the adoption of that.
Interesting. So at the moment, where is Minds, and where are you picturing Minds in, say, 3 years from now?
Yeah. So I mean, for Where's Minds, Minds is at this point probably one of the top five, if not top four, personal AI agents in the world. Which is, by the way, interesting. I would also say, because when you look at the top five personal agents, um, two of them are from native crypto companies. So Minds is from Animoca Brands, and Hermes, basically news research, is actually a crypto company, right? So it's very interesting that so basically, two out of the top five AI agents are actually coming from native AI companies. I think most of the users don't even know that. That doesn't really matter. But the point is that it's interesting, right? And I think the other part, really, sort of to sort of put forward as to why Minds is growing, is that with Minds, you're able to set up an AI agent that can basically do everything that a Claw or Hermes can do, but within 60 seconds, because it does
Mm.
everything over email, and it's also the only one that is truly social. Of course, you can turn your AI agent to become social as well, But with our agents, we begin with this idea that you're social from the get-go, because you have an email and you can tap into Telegram, and we don't have a chatbot. I mean, you can build one, but we don't have a chatbot in the classic sense, because the value comes when I share my AI agent with someone else. And so an example. Let's say you built an incredible harness with your OpenClaw. You've got all this
Yeah.
information. It does the whole thing in your life, and that's great. It's wonderful. It works really well. And I have an OpenClaw setup as well. Um, but would you share your OpenClaw setup with your colleagues at work?
I mean, it depends if I'm asked to.
Well, yes, but it's got your personal information, it's got access to your email, it's got
No.
stuff. You're not gonna do that, right? And that's exactly the same reason why you have multiple agents. So you would have an
Mm,
agent that deals with people at work, an agent that deals with your family, agent that maybe helps you with restaurant bookings with external people, right? I mean, just think about all the people that are supporting or that you hire short term to do activity in a segregated fashion. It's going to be probably in the dozens just for that, right? So so that's what AI agents can do. They can facilitate that
mm,
activity, right? You're not going to be willing to put your main agent that is tapping into all of your files and basically give access to whether it's work or maybe even family, right? Because it's kind of personal, and you don't want that, right? So to me, that's just one sort of example why you need many agents. And the problem is that when you sort of set up these agents, beyond your own setup, and you want to expand them because they're social, then it becomes costly, right? Whereas with Minds, within 60 seconds, you just go to a website, you have an agent right away. If you want to have 100 agents, you can set up 100 agents. You don't have to know how to set up a VPS. You don't have to buy a Mac Mini, right? All that stuff is super fast and super easy to do, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why it's growing so fast. And of course, there's other companies doing similar things, right? But we're the only one that integrates a sort of, a blockchain wallet. And we're the only ones currently that have a native app store type thing. It's our Skills Bazaar. So if I'm building a skill and other agents use it, I get paid a revenue share. And I can tell you for myself, I obviously built some tools and some skills. I'm currently earning somewhere between $500 to $600 a month. It's small, but $500 to $600 a month from people using my skills. But the cost that they're paying is like literally fractions of a cent. It's like 0.1 cent, like 10 cents or something, right? Or like something small. But then at scale, it starts to add up, right? And so it's very. And then the other wonderful thing is that if you build a skill, it's an idea. You ask the mind to build the skill for you. You're not the one coding. The mind is doing the coding, and then you test the idea, and when it works really well, you ask to publish it, and then you start seeing the money roll in, right? And imagine what happens when there's like a billion people in the world using AI agents, or even just tens of millions of users using AI agents actively. That revenue is going to spike, right? And that's to me no different than if you were one of the first app developers, you would have made a lot of money, and the same thing here, right? So I see this as sort of a of course broadening of the audience because everyone can get the power of agents, but really an empowering of the creator economy because AI agents are going to be serving creators in incredibly powerful ways that they couldn't do before.
interesting. That's an interesting take on AI agents, and I'm sure that AI agents will be able to do the boring stuff for us and let us do the interesting, creative stuff, which humans were always meant to.
Mm.
What you explained about mines sort of brings me back to what crypto has been, the crypto sector has been famous for, which is sort of incentivization, communities. I feel that's something that mines has been delivering at the moment. You rightly said that it's one of the top five in terms of numbers, but
Mhm.
if we talk adoption, what countries are seeing most adoption? Do you see geography centric adoption and or demographic centric adoption? What is the age group, and what sort of numbers are we seeing in terms of adoption for mines per se?
Yeah, so I mean, right now, I think mine's currently utilization rate is roughly 30 to 40 billion tokens a day, right? Which obviously is still relatively small in comparison to the top ones, right? But by comparison, I think when you look at the Open Router stats, so I'm using Open Router stats as a comparison. OpenClaw does around 200, 200 billion tokens, right? So you kind of get it gives you some kind of feel as to the gap, right? However, I think the real point though is that this is only just going to keep growing, and
Mm,
and the biggest issue also is for the end user and for us, of course. managing costs because tokens burn very, very quickly. And this is where tokens is powerful because, for instance, right now with mines, you can use your Mocha tokens to basically pay for cognition or earn them through staking. So if I'm basically going to go and sort of have Mocha tokens, I can use it for cognition. There's a real utility for that, right? Whereas before, I couldn't really, I couldn't use it in that context. Or if I stake my Mocha, I get some credit, which I can then basically sort of, yield into cognition credits, which is basically for intelligence, as an example. So you have multiple ways in which you can basically sort of grow and expand the ecosystem. But what I would also say is that the space is still early, right? So it's a
Yeah.
little bit like NFTs in the early days or gaming in the early days. So we're not talking about a billion people. We're talking
Yeah.
about tops millions of people that are using AI agents, more likely hundreds of thousands of users using it very actively. Yet people keep talking about it because they see its potential. But then when you ask your friends and you say, "So who's using an AI agent?" Then typical answer is like, "Oh, I use Claude Cowork or I use Perplexity Computer." And by the way, those are perfectly fantastic AI tools that you should be using, but they're not AI agents, right? They're not truly autonomous, right? They don't work on your behalf unless you ask the question. They work on you and complete a task. Yes, that's true. However, they are not thinking on your behalf to build something new. So the difference would be, let's say, if you're talking about software, is that an application like Replit or would basically or Claude Cowork would build you the product that you asked them to do, and the human in the loop would keep updating and asking, "Is this okay? Does it fit?" and that kind of stuff. Whereas an autonomous AI agent wouldn't necessarily ask you if it basically knows what you want. It would just keep building it until it's ready, and then you see a product that is ready or not. But the point is that he'll deliver you a final product, and he'll keep working on it even if you, you know,
Not wrong.
didn't tell him to do certain things, because the AI agent will come up with new ideas or new constructs that you might not have thought about because he's thinking on your behalf. So there's a big difference between the two.
Absolutely. Totally agreed. A little bit about Animoca. It's a news that Animoca is headed towards a Nasdaq listing, and you've described it as the first publicly listed diversified digital asset conglomerate. What does going public unlock for Animoca and its portfolio companies?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, we've all stated that we need to be a public company again.
Yeah.
Obviously, I can't comment too much about timing and so on, just because it's sensitive and the market obviously keeps shifting. I will say that market circumstances last year when we announced it to this year has changed dramatically, so we have to bear that in mind. But I think for Animoca also is that we really want to be known as an AI company, right? Obviously, crypto is absolutely sort of absolutely critical to what we do, but right now, a lot of people in the world do not connect crypto and AI, even though they're very intertwined, right? And
Mm,
so we see there's an opportunity where we could really identify sort of with that intersection,
yeah.
because we think it's going to be a really big one. So part of a going IPO plan is not just about sort of our financials and all that, and the compliance side, but it's also making sure that the world understands our story better. And
Yeah.
I think the growth that we have in the agentic space and so forth, I think that really sort of makes a difference. So we want to be known essentially as both an AI and crypto company, if you will, because we think they're the same thing.
Absolutely. You also predicted, yeah, that the Clarity Act, if it passes this year, it is going to trigger a wave of tokenization, which I do agree with. How is that conviction holding up at the moment? And what should builders be doing right now to sort of prepare
Yeah.
themselves for this change? In
So
fact,
first,
we're
yeah,
waiting today, if I'm not wrong,
yeah,
that
yes.
discusses Clarity
Yes.
Act. Yeah.
Yeah. So first, very quickly, I think clarity passing, the probability is much lower than perhaps when we first spoke about this earlier in the year or late last year, because sentiment has shifted.
Mm,
And the sentiment is not really related to basically a clarity in and of itself, although it's a big part of it. Sentiment has shifted really mostly because of Trump, right? So
mm,
things like the sort of ethics inclusion in the bill are things that Trump are probably not going to be okay with, but the Democrats are going to try to push it. These are examples of things that while normally such a thing should not have to enter, because the Trump family has done very well in crypto, right? There are people making comments around it, and it's becoming a stumbling block for the passing of clarity, for example. So that's obviously less positive. We do think clarity will eventually pass because crypto is a bipartisan issue, but we also have to bear in mind that for a lot of them, it's more about politics than about what makes sense, right? Unfortunately, that is just the state of the world we often find ourselves in when it comes to politics. Having said that, the SEC, has really sort of gone out and been very public about what they aim to do. So they've been very specific around what is a security and what is not, right? While it's not passed into law per se, the current basically chairperson has been very supportive of crypto and understands that they can't stifle this industry, right? And so if the SEC, as they're already proceeding, is doing a lot of the new kind of rulings or sort of legislation and support for around it, the passing of the Clarity Act is perhaps not the most important thing. It is important because people have clarity and there's sort of a legal framing. However, if you are planning to tokenize something, with the current SEC setup, you can probably get a waiver from the SEC, and work on whatever projects you have, or point to others that have received something similar, right? And they've also, Chair Atkins has also made it clear that he considers NFTs broadly not as securities, that he considers certain tokens that he thinks most tokens are not securities, which is very different from what the previous administration has said, right? So as long as that regime stays sort of as it is, it's still going to be very, very bullish for crypto, whether clarity passes or not. And clarity passing, we do believe a form of clarity will pass, but will it pass this year? That one I'm not so sure anymore, given the politics.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm sure we'll have a little bit of more clarity around this act today after the meeting is concluded.
Yes, indeed.
That said, you've often mentioned that Asia is going to fuse AI and blockchain much before
That's
the
right.
West does, and we've seen a lot of great projects pop up in Asia, or at least being built in Asia. What do you expect to show up first in terms of which market is going to show up first, and which use case do you think is going to be the most targeted one?
So I mean, obviously, we're hoping that Hello Minds is going to be sort of one of those that sort of really shoots up. And the fact that we're growing so quickly is hopefully one indication. But broadly speaking, right, we think that AI has to be very helpful to people in their day-to-day lives. If you think about sort of whether it's a ChatGPT or whether it's an Anthropic, right, because it's been so useful in your own life, everyone starts to adopt and use it, right? And so we think AI agents are one of those very, very natural use cases for that, and it's easy to use, and the intelligence is getting better and better and smarter, and all that type of stuff. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of obvious apparent sort of opportunities that stem from that. But why Asia in particular? Well, we believe that an AI agent only becomes truly powerful and autonomous when it actually has autonomous access to money. And so, how does an agent have autonomous access to money? It has to be on blockchain. I mean, you can give it a credit card, but you can take it away, for instance, and it may not have permissions to do things. And you can't do stock trading or other activities with your credit card. You're going to have, stable coins or something like that, right? So an agent can very easily utilize that and work with other harnesses to basically sort of, or other agents to help support that, right? And then the point is that then which countries are going to be most easily sort of allow the fusing of crypto AI, which is, I would argue natural. Asia again would lead here because Asia is not anti-crypto, right? It is very pro-crypto when you think around the whole region. It sees the value. It saw what it did in underserved areas from a banking standpoint, and so it can see how it connects with agents. Whereas if you go to the US or go to Europe, there's a lot of talk about alternative payment systems that are not blockchain related, in the agent space, right? Which is kind of wild, right? So, and this has more to do with ideology than necessarily practicality. But from their perspective, AI agents and crypto or AI and crypto are not related and have no connection. Okay, and that could be their perspective. We think you're wrong, right? And that has to do with the belief, right? So many people in America don't like crypto but like AI, when in fact some of the biggest AI leaders, be it Elon Musk or Sam Altman, are all very heavily into crypto too.
Crypto, yes, absolutely. Totally agreed. So in terms of use case, of course, payments I think are going a long way, but you did mention complete autonomy when it comes to payments. How far do you think we are as a society in terms of giving complete autonomy to an AI agent? And do you think there are
Oh, I
any
think
constraints?
Well, yeah. So I think it's within 12 months that we give a lot more. I mean, look, it's already happening with the loops, right?
Yeah.
But I would say, the within 12 months, we're going to be very comfortable giving the agents most of the stuff. And
Yeah.
and I'll give you a personal example, for instance, right? So when I'm reviewing GitHubs, and new fantastic GitHub opportunities that emerge because they do really, really cool things, right? I used to, basically sort of, look at the repo. I used to integrate it into my coding tools. I used to take a look at them, not necessarily myself, but basically analyze them and use them and test them and that kind of stuff. And now I just send an agent,
Yeah.
right? The agent basically all he does is he takes, okay, what are the hot sort of, basically GitHubs, and then he verifies them and runs the APIs or runs the MCP or whatever it is that that's built, tests it to see whether it actually works, and then also tests it whether it's applicable to what I may want, and then essentially I have now, instead of a couple of GitHubs that I could review a day because I don't necessarily have time to look at everything, I now have maybe 20 good choices, and they can have the context, because I have long-term memory, of other projects I'm building, so they can say, oh, but you're building this application, this GitHub could be really good. I happen to have tested it as well. I've got a whole thing. Here's how you integrate it, and by the way, I will integrate it for you, right? So just think about all the steps I just saved because an AI agent basically sort of did that, right? So this is a superpower, and if you're not using that, then it's a little bit like you're not using the power of the internet 20 years ago.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've listed out quite a few personal examples where you have used AI, and that has, of course, been completely, I'd say, life changing, saving tons of time for you. How has it? How have you changed as an entrepreneur since the sort of advent of AI at this level? And are there any recommendations for entrepreneurs building today? Uh, what they were doing,
Yeah.
say, a couple of years back versus now? How does it look different, and what should they sort of
if
implement
you're not
more?
if you're not using AI properly, especially agents in your workflow, I think you're kind of doomed. So you have to basically start sort of doing
Simply
stuff
put.
now. Yeah, and I think a lot of people. The reason why a lot of people have tried and not done it, and you see the many stories. Like, how many stories are there of people who tried to set up OpenClaw and just gave up? Right? And by the way, it's not because the concept and the application, when correctly set up, isn't powerful. It's extremely powerful. It's that it still requires you to be somewhat of a technician, if you will, right?
Yeah.
And it's very similar to the early days of the internet, where if you want a web server, someone bought a server, physical. Then he basically put Linux on it, did an installation, then he put Apache on it, and set up all these scripts. And how long did it take him to set up? About as long as it takes someone to set up OpenClaw. Okay, so there's a lot of similar parallels between that. And then, of course, today, when you want to set up a website, you go to Wix, or you go to you go to AWS, you click a button, there it is, right? And that's kind of sort of what we need to create this kind of mass adoption. So for anyone who, whether you're an entrepreneur and you're not that technical, or you want to experiment, I tell people, hey, just sign up for an agent. You can sign up for ours because they're free, but sign up for whoever agent you want, and then start using them, and then integrate them in your activity, and you'll start to learn what you can do, because you're never going to understand it unless you actually use it, right? So that's kind of a really, really sort of a critical point. And for a lot of people, it seems like a hassle, so they didn't install it because it's also unfamiliar, and then they lose out on sort of a lot of potential, right? So I would tell founders basically sort of what are the things that you're doing from a business process or general process every day that an agent could do better, and you'll find that it's a lot of things it could do better, right? And then you basically sort of free up your time for other things. So I recommend every founder work with agents. Now, in our case, we have a $10 million investment program for Minds. So if you're willing to build on Minds, and by the way, it's not exclusive. So you could build applications that work with agents. If you support Minds and you've integrated the skill, you could be eligible for investment, especially if we think it can help grow the ecosystem, right? We've already made a few investments. The most public one was Superior to Trade, but we've done other ones as well that basically help facilitate the growth of basically sort of trading, for instance, for agents safely. It works for Minds, but it also works for OpenClaw. It also works for Hermes, right? So we believe in an interoperable agentic future.
Absolutely. Towards the beginning of the interview, Yat, you said something very striking, which has in fact stuck with me, which was how the ad industry has completely changed. And you were
Mm.
absolutely right about how discovery has changed after AI agents came into picture. In this world, how does one build a brand, and how is Animoca preparing its own companies for this future where sort of marketing is different, branding or brand building has completely changed?
So, you know, in a nutshell, everything that we knew, which was, the internet broadly, was driven by the attention economy.
Right.
So if you think about it, it was very hard to monetize the internet in the traditional sense. Yes, you have subscriptions, but advertising is almost $1 trillion a year. Okay. And that advertising revenue is what drives Facebook over 90%, Google
Yeah.
over 70%, and every other major internet company has major lines of revenue coming from advertising, which is really, if you think about it, just microtransactions in the form of media.
Yeah.
When you're buying, when you're buying ads, you're buying, some amount of money, 5, 10, 50, $100 per million views or per million clicks, right? So it's really, if you think about it, once you subdivide that, it's no different than paying for content, but it's just 0.00001, right? It just wasn't feasible to do it before, and now with blockchain you can. So that means that we're going to see a future in which all the agents are going to basically doing A to A, basically agent to agent transactions between each other and yourself, right? They don't
Right.
only have to disintermediate with large corporations. They might say, oh, I want to sort of have very specific knowledge around a topic that you happen to write a blog about, and you basically have some kind of agentic framework that if I get to use your blog content for my AI agent, I can pay 10 cents for it, right? So instead of you paying a subscription fee, you might get paid, by other AI agents to use your data and use your access, right? And that's how we think this economy will grow. And blockchain is perfect for that, right? As I said, I'm already earning around, $600 a month, right? Which I think will eventually grow. This is a real business if you get into the, basically add a couple more zeros, and that becomes a small business. Add another few zeros, it becomes a medium-sized business, right? And you can see how that ecosystem can really, really grow and evolve. But what is going to be there is that the advertising industry is fundamentally shifted as a result of this, and if companies don't adapt to this, they will basically be left behind.
Right. That makes sense. Absolutely. I actually have a rapid fire round
Please.
to conclude this interview with. I feel it's always fun, and if in case any of the audiences sort of fell asleep while we were doing this, they might get a quick wake up. So
Sure.
I have 10 questions, really
Mm.
quick, probably a one word or a one liner, whatever works. Should we go?
Let's go.
All right. So, first question is one word for the state of crypto in 2026.
Anxious.
Bitcoin or Ethereum? Pick one.
Oh dear. Okay, that's unfair. But if I had to pick one, we're utility maxis, so it would have to be Ethereum.
Right. Makes sense. You're going to disappoint a lot of Bitcoin maxis, though, but that's
I
okay.
have a lot of Bitcoin. But yes, I understand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. The first thing you tell, you let an AI agent do with your own money.
Oh, so I mean, right now, it's handling flight bookings and trips and so on. It's pretty easy.
That makes sense.
But I use Superior.trade as well to basically do a little bit of trading on Hyperliquid. And, I'm not a Hyperliquid trader myself. I don't have time to sort of do all that stuff. But I have a little bit of fun with it, and I no longer have to sort of switch the buttons, as it were. I just have the
Mhm.
agent do it for me. So it's more interesting for me.
Interesting. One app that your mom or dad would actually end up using.
Well, so it turns out that my mom is using our AI agents for
Wow.
genealogy.
She
So she's
shouldn't use your mom then.
well, no, she's, I mean, so she, so and there were some articles from my cousin around this where he ended up really sort of creating big lifelong history stories around stuff that the AI agent found him. It turns out that AI agents are much better, and certainly with Hello Minds, we have a special skill which is for genealogy, but they tend to be much, much better in finding sort of your ancestry than sites like ancestry.com, which makes sense. So they keep hunting and searching and looking.
Interesting. Most overrated buzzword in Web3 right now.
Overrated. Wow. Overrated. I don't know. Maybe it's tokenization, because everything's tokenized,
Yeah.
It's like so I would, overrated might be the wrong word, but the point is that everyone talks about it, but it's kind of everywhere in anything, right? So I would say, it's super important, but everything's tokenized anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But so yeah, so I think tokenization is kind of like a, it's kind of like a, like a typical thing. We don't have to talk about it, but but there are a lot of people who talk about tokenization as if it was something new, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. Hong Kong or Silicon Valley? Where's the next big Web3 giant coming from?
Uh, so, this is a tough one because obviously, I would normally have to say Hong Kong, right? I'm on the Web3 Council. But I think, because of the innovation and because of what's happening in the AI space, I think that, existing company, not sort of included per se, meaning that, the existing companies, but if it was a new company, I do think that Silicon Valley has a higher probability because of the talent base. If it is more broadly accepting to crypto,
Hmm.
which is the test case, right?
Yeah,
So it is a 50-50, but I would probably lean to Silicon Valley because there's more capital and there's more AI talent, and the AI and crypto talent is what sort of glues it together.
absolutely. And since we know you're a trained musician, this one's specially for you. If your Nasdaq listing had a theme song, what would it be?
A theme song. Wow. Okay. Well, I have one, but I think maybe the maybe the more likely one that people can understand is probably the Valkyrie by Wagner.
Interesting.
Yes.
One portfolio company out of 600 that you'd bet your reputation on. I think this would be a difficult one. But
Well, that's like picking your favorite child, right? That's really tough. But I would say let me share an outlier, right? That most people might not even know, and that company is called Colossal. So that's a portfolio company of ours. We were their seed investor back in 21. They recently, earlier this year, raised around a 10 billion valuation, so done very well. And they're a company that is in biotech and have restored, the dire wolf. Most famous for trying to bring back the woolly mammoth. So a lot of people say, "Oh, isn't it like Jurassic Park?" It's much more than that, right? But of course, we invested in them because we thought about ways in which we could support them back in the day, and it turns out that they're growing really, really fast, and they're kind of a different kind of company, but also quite relevant to our space, which we can discuss maybe later. But yeah, that would give an example of something like that.
oh, interesting stuff. NFTs in one word: dead, sleeping, evolving, or something else?
Oh, I would say absolutely evolving. So first, NFT is still about $200 to $300 million of sales a month, and perhaps the largest use case is Pokemon card trading. Right? In
Absolutely.
fact, the value of Pokemons has gone up significantly because now there's a market, and guess how the market is established? Through blockchain, right? And this will happen with art. This will happen with other collectibles, right? So it's an RWA, but without NFT technology, we would not have Pokemon exchanges, as it were,
Absolutely. Absolutely. For sure. Complete the sentence. In 2030, the metaverse is dash.
everywhere in your life.
Love it. Yes. Super. I hope that you had fun, Yad. I for sure had a
Thank you
lot
so
of fun,
much.
and there were a lot of key takeaways from this interview, like there are always. And looking forward to seeing you at one of these events really soon.
Thank you so much, and I really enjoyed it.
Likewise, do you have any closing words for the audiences or anything that you'd like to say?
I mean, I think the main thing I would tell the audience is again, you got to start using agents. We have a competition running now at hellominds.ai. If you basically sign up for it, not just the investment program. I most recently actually I purchased, on the market 22 Mochaverse NFTs. I'm also giving away 3 ETH for this competition. It's a personal campaign that I'm running. It's not related to the company. And this, by the way, just shows what you can now do with agents because I basically, together with Minds, helped build an application that was a competition. It was a kind of application that other minds could compete in, so kind of like a battleground. But it's been a long time since I shipped code, and now I ship code almost every day because AI agents can do this for you, and they can really just sort of visualize or like basically express your what you want to do, right? So anyway, if you want to try it out in a fun way that doesn't cost you any money, and maybe potentially you might win something because your agent does such a great job, consider HelloMinds.ai. Give it a shot. Try the competition.
Absolutely. I'll definitely drop Hello Minds' link below in the video for people to use if they want to. And once again, thank you so much, Yad, for joining us today. And I hope people keep up with crypto in the best possible ways. Thanks.
Absolutely.